Tenemos una guerra interna.
We are in a state of internal armed conflict as organized crime has declared war on the state. And the state must use all legal force to fight back.
That was the voice of the former president of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, discussing the current crisis in his country.
Our armed forces and national police take to the streets, respond intelligently with full support, using all available resources to defeat these criminal gangs. 7 years of destruction, hatred, and accumulated mistakes. The rule of law disappeared because of political persecution, and today we cry bloody tears. They sowed the wind, and now they will reap the whirlwind. Unfortunately, President Noboa has no experience. He is completely unprepared for this job. But we must unconditionally support him as the country is engulfed in armed conflict.
Ecuador is currently in the grip of a wave of violence that's been unseen since President Correa's term ended in May of 2017. For more on that, we speak with journalists Camila Escalante and Stephen Sefton. So that was the former president of Ecuador, and he expressed support, but recognized, or in any event, made the claim that there have been some serious problems there. Camila, give us an idea of what things are like in Ecuador.
Well, as we saw, there was just a scenario of total chaos yesterday, although we've been seeing this similar scenario for 6.5, almost 7 years, as former President Rafael Correa has said. But in recent weeks, we've seen an uptick of these terrorist acts of violence around the country, not in a specific limited area, but in major cities and different provinces of Ecuador. We're seeing car bombs, hostage situations, as in the case of those journalists and press workers who were taken hostage at that broadcast station in Guayaquil. We're seeing cars incinerated. We're seeing gang members shutting down roads. And all of these other assassinations and acts of terror throughout Ecuador. And so what has happened is that 1.5 months into this administration, this young 36-year-old president, Daniel Noboa, who is the son of this banana exporter, the richest man in Ecuador, Alvaro Noboa, he won the presidency in the fall, and he has had to take office inheriting the disastrous situation in the country due to the disastrous policies of the two U.S.-backed former presidents, Lenin Moreno and Guillermo Lasso, that have governed since Rafael Correa ended his 10 years of administration. And of course, 2017, Rafael Correa left the country as one of the safest in all of Latin America. The crime statistics and homicide rate, everything had dramatically improved during those 10 years, and now they have dramatically worsened. Ecuador is a country that sits between Peru and Colombia, the world's largest cocaine producers and exporters, and Ecuador itself is an exporter of cocaine, much of the cocaine that arrives in Europe. And that's all being done by these massive criminal organizations, these cartels, of which 22 were named yesterday by the president in a presidential decree in which he said that 22 organizations have been identified as terrorist groups and belligerent non-state actors. And he says that the police and military are going to crack down now on these organizations to try to neutralize them using, all the state apparatus, given all of the riots and prison massacres and the hostage takings in the prisons, and that situation that has led to this increased violence on the exterior of the prisons, where all of these high-level gang leaders have escaped prison. Only some of them have been recaptured. And so people are living in fear right now. People are trying to trying to get an idea of all of what took place yesterday. But it's just been a very chaotic situation. And of course, people are demanding that this new president, who's been in office for less than 2 months, get a hold of this situation, capture these different criminal gang members, and put them back in prison. And of course, they're demanding things like prison reform and other things to try to return the country back to its state in 2017, when former President Rafael Correa left office.
Stephen, just the idea, I mean, they've been calling, for example, we heard the United States offered to help in this situation. Just looking at Colombia's history with the United States and cocaine and the CIA, how ridiculous is that?
Well, I've argued for many years that what the United States does is creates chaos and disruption on the one hand, say with its right hand, and then when it lifts up its left hand and says, well, we're here to help. You can see that in country after country in the region. And it seems to me that what we're seeing here is another example of the way that the United States and its allies, because they're losing power globally and influence globally, what they're trying to do is to create a situation of chaos and disruption, very much along the lines of what they've done in Haiti. What they're trying to do is to create a situation of chaos throughout the region, of which Ecuador is the latest example. And at the end of last year, it had a murder rate of 47 per 100,000 of the population, which is something like 8 or 9 times the world average. And the United States wants that kind of situation because it can exploit it to maintain its declining influence and prestige and control in the region, very much as they've done in Haiti. And you can see that happening also in Argentina with the election of the extreme right-winger Javier Milei. And it seems to me that this is also calls into question the very model of representative democracy in terms of how can the region break out of this circle of disruption and chaos that's being imposed from the outside.
It's an interesting thing looking at this particular example play out. Peru, also cocaine producers you mentioned, and the state of instability that exists there. I mean, basically you get elected president, you go into the presidential palace, you leave, you go to a prison cell. That's happened like more often than not in the last decade or so. And Colombia, of course, with the chaos that was there for 60 some odd years until very recently. We know all about the cocaine traffic that the CIA used to finance Iran-Contra and the plague that made on the streets of the United States, let alone the plague of violence across the region. Ecuador seems to be sliding into that if it's not stopped.
Yeah, and if I may, I'd like to note that Gustavo Petro, and whatever one thinks of his politics, and he's making a very determined effort to try and engage in a peace process, not just with the former guerrilla movements and the paramilitaries, but also with criminal organizations like the so-called Clan del Golfo. And what he's trying to do is roll back the situation that Camila has described in Ecuador that could very easily take over in Colombia under other circumstances. And so if you look at what the United States is doing in the region, it has essentially co-opted countries like Ecuador and Peru. In Ecuador's case, a government that is taken over with only a year to run, because Guillermo Lasso, the previous president, had reached almost the end of his third year before he resigned, forcing the elections that led to the presidency of Daniel Noboa. And what the United States is able to do in these kinds of situations, in Peru, you had this effective coup d'etat against the former president Pedro Castillo. So there's effectively a usurper government in Peru and this very unstable government in Ecuador. And the United States likes that because it means it's better able to control the region.
Camila, final word?
Yeah, what happened Tuesday is that in addition to designating those 22 organizations as terror groups and belligerent non-state actors, Noboa also declared the country to be in internal armed conflict. But it seems that he has other challenges and that he might have an internal power conflict within his own government. And it's important to say that the reason why he's in power and took office in November was because the previous government of Guillermo Lasso had to to see himself out because of his ties to the Albanian mafia and because of how embedded those criminal cartel organizations were throughout the Ecuadorian state that continues today. They have infiltrated the police, they've infiltrated the military, and all sorts of other levels and departments of the government. So it's going to be very difficult. He's in a situation where he, as Stephen has described, has very little influence and power, even over his own country and his own government, because so much of that has been ceded to the U.S. Embassy, but also to these criminal organizations and other entities within his government. So it's going to be very difficult for him to carry out this crackdown that everybody wants to see.
But we're going to be keeping our eyes open, and we'll get back with you both about this as it develops. And thank you very much for your time and your expertise.
Thanks a million, Don. Look forward to talking to you next week.
Thank you, Don.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.